Okay, so welcome everybody to our TUC Climate Justice preview event. It's coordinated by the Unite Grassroot Climate Justice Caucus. I'm Clara Paylard, one of the coordinator of this caucus. We are a group of rank and file Unite reps and members who aim to take our union to more progressive directions when it comes to the issue of the climate crisis, its impact on workers and communities, and the solutions we actually propose as a movement. The event is co-sponsored by the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group and the Greener Jobs Alliance. I want to thank in particular Sasha and Ellen for helping initiate this meeting and coordinate the speakers and supporting the organizing. So most of you will know, I hope, that the TUC Congress is happening next week in Brighton, gathering the trade union movement of this country. And they will see many debates and vote on some key policies and directions for our workers. The issue of the climate crisis has become an increasingly important topic at TUC Congress in the past 10 years, and often has been one of the most controversial, if not the most controversial. In the past 10 years, we've observed a divide between a block of more progressive unions who demand urgent actions and strategy, and unions with large memberships in industries like mine, Unite, who have been, maybe slower to respond to the climate crisis and have prioritized the issue of jobs over climate. And that takes us back to 15 years ago when the climate jobs campaign started, which demonstrated that we can create many jobs in the sustainable sectors for the future and for a just transition. So we shouldn't let the issue of jobs slow us down when it comes to action. Over 10 years ago, a majority of unions rejected the fracking industry at TUC Congress and the jobs it could bring, despite some unions signing deals with the fracking industry. In recent years, the TUC just transition strategies have tended to exclude a number of unions in the public sector and some other key unions who represent workers in emergency services, local authority, health, transport, food and agriculture, focusing the union action on pollutive industry only. And this year, there will be a number of key motions that we've highlighted in the email you would have received prior to this meeting. Many of those motions will determine the direction of travel for the trade union movement. So key debates are going to take place. And you may have seen that motion 14 from Unite is based around the idea of no ban without a plan. Let's not stop fossil fuel extraction without having a plan for workers. And that's been a key move away from previous stance that simply were supporting new extraction of fossil fuel blindly, but maybe it doesn't go far enough. We've also got motion 15 from the GMB, who keep insisting on supporting more fossil fuel extraction as well as nuclear, and justify that with domestic security and jobs. But many motions tabled are reckoning with the urgency of acting on the climate crisis. And we've got some fantastic speakers tonight from the most progressive unions to decipher what are the issues on the agenda, what are the challenges delegates may face at this year's Congress. And this event is more of a briefing rather than a debate, as the majority of us are not delegates to Congress and we've got little power to influence what will happen. So we're gonna have our speakers. I'll just briefly introduce them before giving them the mic. We'll start with Ian Hodson, the president of the Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union, who's got a motion about climate change and workers' health and the heat strike. Followed by Ben Selby. Hopefully Ben arrived now, with his Assistant General Secretary of the Fire Brigade Union. They've got an amendment to this Bakers Union motion. And obviously the climate crisis and its impact is significant for firefighters, who were really busy this week with the the report of the finding of the Grenfell fire. So we know that our firefighters are on the front line of many events, climate related or not. We'll be joining by Mel Mullings from the RMT. She's the London Transport Regional Council Green Officer, followed by John Moloney, the Assistant General Secretary of PCS, who have got an important motion on the agenda, and a challenge with a GMB amendments. Liz Whitley, who is from Unison National Executive Committee, also a union that has got a very significant motion on the agenda. We'll hear from Vicky Blake, the UCU Climate and Ecological Emergency Committee co-chair and also an NEC members who've got an amendment to the Unison motion. And last but not least, Suzanne Jeffrey from the National Education Union and the chair of the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group will comment on the challenge that we hear from the other speakers and maybe do a little bit of a summary. We will then have a moment of questions and comments that may last up to 25 minutes, hopefully, if we've got time. And our speakers will have a chance to come back, but may not be unlikely to be able to respond to every single question and comment that people will make. Okay, that's enough for me. And I'm really pleased to pass on the mic to our first speaker, Ian Hodson, the president of the Bakers Union. Ian, you've got your 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Clara. It's really nice to be here, and obviously, the Bakers Union is taking a motion to conference on the issue of heat. A few years back, TUC did adopt a policy around the Cooler campaign, which was calling for action to be taken in workplaces when it reached 27 degrees if you're a manual worker and 30 degrees if you was working in an office or a less manual role. Obviously, since 2017-2019 election, unfortunately, no political parties picked up and run with a policy that wants to introduce workplaces temperatures where employers introduce measures when the weather gets too hot. But we've now since been working with an organisation called Heat Strike, and part of the reason for doing that is because we believe it's very important that the trade union movement and the climate movement start working more cooperatively together, easy for me to say. And we think it's really critical that if the unions are going to be relevant to the next generation of workers, that we understand that climate is a big issue for young workers and young people. And I think it's really, really important that where we can work together collectively, that we should do so. So which is why I'm really pleased that we've been working alongside the campaign called Heat Strike and the people involved in that. And part of that, the Heat Strike is calling for action to be taken. For example, when temperatures reach 40 degrees, and obviously workers are expected to work in that, and they're calling for workers to stop working at 40 degrees or temperatures up to 40 degrees. People will remember a couple of years back that the temperatures did indeed reach 40 degrees. And unfortunately in the UK, because we're not capable of responding to such high temperatures, most employers found that they were unable to run. And it really, really is a massive issue. I got invited onto the Stormy Huntley show, I think she's called, on Channel 5, because obviously the newspapers have picked up on this heat strike campaign. The Telegraph ran a story on it, and then the Jeremy Vine show invited us on to discuss it. It's no surprise that the people on the panel were quite opposed to the idea that workers should be protected because the weather gets hot. They kept referring to it as giving workers a day off because it was a sunny day outside, and then trying to compare the temperatures in the UK with those in South Africa. If I'd have done a little bit more research and realised they were going to go down that route, I'd have pointed out to the fact that actually in South Africa, they do have legislation and protections in place as they do in the United States of America. And part of the reasons why, these countries have these measures in place is because they realise that actually, high temperatures cause death, and it causes many illnesses such as cardiovascular problems, kidney dysfunction, as well as physical injury. In fact, the ILO recently reported that they expect 18,970 work-related deaths and around 23 million workplace injuries annually, down to climate and also down to the issues of extreme heat. So the need is there to put in place what we believe workers need in the UK. And again, something that's modelled on something that's happening across in Europe and Italy, of all places, where they've actually introduced a scheme that in extreme weathers, when workers can't work in the building industry, they're able to actually receive a payment. So in the UK, a couple of years ago, when people weren't able to work, they were told either use your holidays or take unpaid leave, or they were found probably the dirtiest job in the factory if they refused to do either of those things, just as a punishment for them not taking the time off, because obviously the managers would have had to come alongside. So as part of the campaign and as part of the TUC motion, we're saying that there needs to be a furlough scheme introduced, because your holidays are supposed to be there for your time of need and for the issues that's in your life that enable you to take the time off when you want to take that time off, and not when the employer can't find you work. And we believe that scheme should either be funded by the employers directly, because a lot of these employers pay into business lobbies that have lobbied the government over the years to make sure that they get their own way on policy, which has led to many of the issues that we face currently with the climate crisis. But we're not bothered whether it's government or business that pays, as long as it's not the worker. And we believe it's time that we were planning as well. So part of what we're calling for is that, measures be put in place to protect workers in temperatures that reach 27 or 30 degrees. We have a lot of those already with the employers that we negotiate with, where we've put in, so people know what's going to happen if temperatures get to 27 or 30 degrees in their workplace, where they get extra breaks and extra additional fluids provided by the employer. But we think it needs to go further than just that. We also think it needs to take into account that people shouldn't have to work outside when the heat's at its hottest, and we believe those measures need to be put in place too. For example, in the United Arab Emirates, between the hours of 12 till 3, they have legislation says that workers don't work, as they do in places like Spain and Germany too. So we're not asking for the world. We don't believe it's an impossible thing to achieve. We're seeking support, obviously, from our comrades and sisters and brothers of the trade union movement. But again, I can't stress enough how important it is that the trade union movement gets a grip of the climate issues that we all face as workers. And I do understand the need to protect employment, but there is no employment on a dead planet. And I think it's really critical that we recognise how important it is now that we start dealing with these issues collectively, and recognise it's by working with those climate campaigns that the trade union movement will actually improve its position, not just in the workplace, but in the communities too. So thank you very much, Clara.
Thank you so much, Ian, for your input, and also for bringing this very important motion, which hopefully won't be too controversial, and we'll see a wide range of support across the union movements. It was interesting that you're also working with climate groups, such as Heat Strike, to work on those issues. And we did see that workers in India, in the Amazon warehouses, were very concerned about the rise in temperature. So it's an international issue as well that could really be unifying the movement. I was looking for the next speakers, Ben Selby from the FBU, but I don't think he's arrived yet. There was a FBU meeting on Grenfell just before, so I am going to continue through the list of speakers, and I don't think our RMT speaker is here either, unless I'm wrong, Mel. No, okay. So in that case, I'm gonna now jump directly to John Moloney, the Assistant General Secretary of PCS. We've got a very important motion, very progressive motion as well on the agenda. So John, please let us know what this is about and what may be the possible challenges that you may face.
Thanks so much, Clara, and thank you everybody who's attended this meeting. And obviously, some of you, no doubt, will attend the meeting at Congress itself. I think the importance of the PCS motion is that we say up front that we need a rapid transition away from fossil fuels. And it's that what's caused within the little TUC world that we live in, certain amount of controversy. At least one union has tried to amend that so that that particular section is deleted. But our union at the moment has resisted those changes and will resist those changes because we think we need a clear statement before the TUC that we have to move away from fossil fuels. We have to move away from petrol, oil derivatives, and gas. We have to do that because there are no climate-friendly oil fields, gas fields, and every time we use gas, every time we use petrol, we contribute to climate change. And if we believe that we are facing a crisis of humanity, which I think clearly we are, then we have to take the necessary measures in order to avert that crisis. And that means a rapid transition away from fossil fuels. However, we do recognise, and it's really, really important, that that has to be done in the context of transitional plans that guarantee work for the workers. Because the motion recognises that if we don't have those protections, then climate change will become a wedge issue that the right wing will use to divide the trade union movement and also the general population. So we've already seen the right wing argue that the moves to renewable fuels is the cause of the increase in energy prices, when it's nothing to do of the sort. It's clearly to do with partly the Ukrainian war. A lot of it is to do with the straightforward profiteering. In other words, oil companies have taken advantage of the international situation to jack up their prices. But also, and it's fundamentally the case, it's because of the private sector nature of the fuel energy system in this country. And that's why we also put in the vital necessity for public ownership. Now, in my union, we try to use the word socialization of the energy, water, transport systems, etc., rather than nationalization. Because nationalization has the connotation that you go to the chief executive's door and you just scrub out private sector and you put in public sector. But the hierarchy, the way unions are treated, the way the public is treated remains exactly the same. In other words, they ape the private sector, even though supposedly they're in the ownership of you, me, and everybody on this call. Socialization, at least in our concept, implies democracy, control by the public, but also, I'll be blunt, worker control of those industries. Because certainly for my union, a vital component or the fight against climate change is a notion that workers should take control or have agency in the fight against climate change, but also have agency in the control of their industries. So we've got another part of the motion that talks about building of combines within and across sectors to develop common industrial strategies that contribute to a whole economy approach. In other words, Lucas plans writ large, a notion that the workers themselves know what's needed to be done in the industry, and they themselves should develop those plans so that we can actually move to net zero much more rapidly than we are now. And last but not least, we recognise in the PCS, we mainly organise in the UK civil service, that the state is broken. It's broken certainly in terms of being able to deal with the climate change crisis. It's broken because the civil service is divided into feuding departments that don't actually pull in the same directions, departments that actually are very territorial and look after their patch and don't work to a common endeavour. And we say, therefore, the civil service should be radically reorganised and what we call a national climate service be created, which will unite all the climate change functions within the state to bring them into a common service, but to go beyond that, to have that service reach out to the other democratic parts of this country, to the devolved governments, councils, etc., to develop a democratically decided plan to move to net zero as rapidly as possible, and certainly well before 2050. So we think that the motion does have merits. Obviously, every union who puts motions up to TUC thinks the same. However, I do think this will cause controversy because, as I say, of the very clear statement that we must move away from fossil fuels. Some unions, and it's quite obviously why, objectively why, want to maintain the current fossil mix. They want to do that because they believe that's the only way to maintain jobs. Now, in the medium to long term, it's not. To be blunt, those jobs are going to go by the market because renewable fuels are becoming increasingly cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And if you just allow our market forces, there will be catastrophic job losses in those industries. And we say we should plan our way to a new future, but one that protects people, because as I said, and I'll start to come to an end now, if we don't offer that protection, then those workers under threat, quite rightly, will lash out or possibly lash out at the climate change movement, because they'll say, all you offer me is the dole queue. You offer me no hope and no future. And therefore, it's vitally important that they do not become the foot soldiers for a right wing that quite intelligently is trying to drive, as I said, a wedge between the progressive movement over the climate change and the mass of people, because the mass of people obviously potentially could be manipulated if the trade union movement is not progressive, if the trade union movement is actually not clear about what it wants. So Claire, I'll finish on that. As I said, I don't know how it's going to go down in conference. As everybody knows, the TUC is a machine for generating composite motions. My union, the union, is fighting tooth and nail to avoid compromise, at least compromise of those key elements. Clearly, if other people come up with forms of words that mean the same and can actually bridge gaps, clearly we're not going to reject that. But we will reject compromises that basically gut the motion of its key elements. We'll see if that happens. And for those of you who are in Congress, hopefully I'll see you there. And hopefully after this motion is passed, we can, if you like, have a quiet celebration. But then the key task is actually making sure the TUC actually implement this particular motion. Cheers, Clara. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for this clarity and determination that, you know, PCS have shown for a long time. My former union, I'm still proud of that. And I mean, interestingly, Unison has got, you know, quite a similar motion with very progressive elements as well. And that's why I'm now, you know, gonna invite Liz to be our next speaker. But just to add that, as well as the GMB amendment trying to wreck the sort of fossil fuel extraction opposition, there is another interesting element which appear in the Unison motion, which is about just transition should be discussed and have strategy in all sectors, not just those sectors that we see of pollutive industry, because the climate crisis is relevant to all. So Liz, I'm inviting you to speak from the National Executive Committee of Unison, very big union when it comes to local government, health, and a number of other sectors as well. So the floor is yours for your 5 minutes.
Thanks, Clara, and thanks everybody for the invite. And of course, we also have energy workers in our union. So we've had quite a big debate about where we get to. I think, first of all, I'm going to start with something that is important that we always start with, that isn't actually in any of the motions, But I always think it's really important that we thank young people for getting the climate emergency to the top of the political agenda. Had it not been for some of their actions, the Fridays for Future, the school students walkouts and the like, I don't think we would have had quite such a galvanised debate in the trade union movement, actually, as we've had over the last few years. And I think they deserve the credit for focusing us, really. Having said that, I think the last couple of years, actually, the TUC policy has gone backwards from 2019. You think back in 2019, they supported the school students' day of action that they were having in late September, and called on union members to support them to take carry out activities, take actions where they could. And certainly it made a difference in my local branch. We managed to organise a really big lunchtime rally. We got our employers to ring the sirens because we said it's an emergency. You have to ring an emergency alarm. We've got about 400 people to come out of work for a lunchtime rally, and a relatively significant number of us just went on the demonstration, didn't go back into work, and nothing happened actually to us for doing that. And that also wouldn't have happened without that combination of the young people and that TUC motion. That made us much bolder in what we tried to do. So therefore, I think it's really important that we try and pull back the TUC to a position much closer to that, to improve what's happened over the last couple of years, where we have seen a chipping away at that position and putting that having a plan before we address the climate emergency the wrong way around, if you like, putting the cart before the horse. So on the unison motion, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right, Clara. It's got a remarkable similarity to the PCS motion. And that's not accidental, actually. It's because we did try and coordinate to make sure there was at least one union got a motion in that covered some of those key points that John's just talked about. I think it's even better that there's two, actually. It sends a really strong message out there. I think because neither of us was entirely sure that which motions were going to be prioritised, we did the right thing and both of us put those motions forward. So we share some of those points about a rapid transition from fossil fuels. And we do have, we want to guarantee protection in transition, but we don't want that to be used to delay anything. As John said, that, there won't be any protection on a dead planet. And that's one of my problems with motion 14, actually, the Unite one, as I think it was Clara said at the beginning. That's about saying we can't reduce fossil fuels until we have that plan in place. I think you'll never get the plan in place unless you have the commitment to reduce and the actions necessary to reduce fossil fuels. I also have to say in that motion as well, as somebody who grew up on the on the edge of the mining industry up in Yorkshire and was definitely politicised by that, I think it's a false analogy actually in that motion to say that that workers, oil and gas workers, shouldn't become the miners of net zero. The miners weren't attacked over the climate emergency. That wasn't what Thatcher was about. The miners were attacked to break the trade union movement, and we have to be really clear about that as well. Like the PCS, we're a big fan of a national climate service because we do think that planning is a good thing to try and do this, because you think of the scale of what we want to talk about. It's not going to happen in a piecemeal way or in an accidental way. There has to be serious thought about how to carry this out and about how it's going to be coordinated, about what are the things that need to happen, as an absolute priority, what are the things that make the next steps possible and all the rest of it. One of the things that's different in ours, actually, and it would be really easy to say here, we thought of it. In actual fact, it's one of our officers in Unison came up with this idea as a motion to our national conference, and we've included it in here. But that's to have a year of green trade union activity. We thought it was a good idea for our own union, but actually it's a good idea across the union movement, and I think can open doors for union members who want to take organising and activity around the environment and the climate emergency seriously. So we thought that was worth putting in there as well. Our position is to support both the amendments that we've got to our motion. We don't, because they're both positive amendments, actually, we don't have motions like the PCS one have. And certainly in our delegation meetings, I'll be arguing that we oppose motions 14 and 15, and indeed the amendments to the PCS motion, and that they're not composited, because I don't see how you can composite conflicting motions, unless, as John said, they totally, to be honest, change quite dramatically what they're saying at the moment as well. Because, for instance, Unison has a position of no increase in nuclear energy, and motion 15 has backing the build of Sizewell C and the rest of it in it. So to us, that's in direct conflict with our policy as well. So I think there will therefore be quite a lively debate on conference floor, which I think is a good thing. I don't think there's enough debates necessarily at conferences about really important issues. I also think it matters that we think about some of the other unions that are there, because it's really easy to think of the biggest 6 or 8 unions and what their position will be. There will be a lot of other unions who I think will want to have a good debate and hear what they can be involved in around the climate emergency. And therefore, those of us who are at the TUC, I think we have a responsibility to try and talk to some of those delegations and some of those where, even when it's individual members, about supporting the Unison motion and amendments and the PCS motion, but not the amendments to it, and indeed the Bakers Union motion as well. I think we could do quite an important job around that at the TUC conference as well. So I hope that's given a little bit of an insight. I mean, as I say, it's massively similar to the PCS motion, but that is because we were really determined to try and make sure that there was a really positive climate emergency motion on the agenda at TUC. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz, for your insight, and also commenting on your union position or what argument you will make at your delegation meeting in opposition of some of the motions. I think that's an interesting insight for all of us. And the UCU has put an amendment to the Unison motion. And I mean, I believe that they are in support of the motion, but they've put an amendment on it that's quite important. And now I'm going to pass on the mic to Vicky Blake, who is from the UCU Climate and Ecological Emergencies Committee, co-chair, I believe, and also on the National Executive Committee. So yeah, Vicky, if you would like to share your thoughts, that would be great.
Thank you. Can I just check you can hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Great. So thank you so much for inviting me. And it's been really good to listen to everyone. And I'm glad we're doing this meeting ahead of TUC. I think it's really helpful to be talking through all of this. And I also just want to pay testament to the Greener Jobs Alliance special edition that they've put out ahead of TUC, which looks in depth at these issues and talks about, the being on the right side of history as a trade union movement. As you said, Clara, we have an amendment into Unison's motion, and that amendment is intended to be friendly. You could probably sort of sum it up by saying that a biofuel-powered tank is still a tank. It's still a destructive form of technology, and this is intended to strengthen the motion because we need to transition away from destructive industry and destructive technologies. But I think in terms of thinking at the challenges that we're going to have at TUC, I've just been reflecting what other speakers have been saying. And I was struck by the phrase "no ban without a plan" and how that needs to become intensively plan, bargain, build, restructure, and radically democratically renationalise, so that we can have it needs to be flipped on its head. And I think the message that I think it was John was talking about, hope and the future, it's such an important point, because as trade unionists, we have to believe that there's hope, or I'm not sure we would be doing what we're doing. Our bargaining, our campaigning is all built on a bedrock of hope, and not just hope, but belief that we can make a difference when we work collectively, that we can build that new world, that we can build better together, democratically. So I was thinking about the way that we have to focus on the practical work of building confidence among workers who are in carbon heavy industries and people in communities where those are major employers as well. And recognize that we're all affected, whatever industry we work in, or if we don't work, or whether we're still in education, whether we're retired, whether we're unable to work. But we have to build that confidence amongst the wider society as well, that a truly just transition is actually possible, that as a trade union movement, we are resolute and we're working for it. We're doing that graft together to make it happen. And it's important, I think, as part of this, that our own unions, as organisations, as employers, are also walking this talk. You know, how our own emissions need to be looked at, our own practices need to be looked at as well. And I think that actually starts to help build a picture of what's possible. And I think the Unison and PCS motions provide a really good template for the hard work that has to be done. And we have to recognise that, and you know, everyone's been saying, but we have to recognise the legitimate concerns of workers who are in those carbon heavy industries about their livelihoods being left behind. And we can't afford to delay is the problem. And we, you know, that image in the Greener Jobs Alliance of the sort of 90 seconds to midnight graphic is really compelling, and it's really real, and it's really terrifying. And I think the reality here is it's going to be really hard. It is really hard work. But that belief in collective action to translate hope into better conditions, better jobs, and a safe society, a planet where people can flourish and grow, it means that we have to really get in there and start doing that planning work. And I think if I look at our own union, so UCU has for quite a while had a grassroots green reps network, and we've developed that, and ideas came out of that. That's how the Climate and Ecological Emergency Committee came into being, because it was decided that we needed something within our structures. And rooting it in that grassroots work has helped us to develop a green bargaining agenda at local and sector level. And we're making it might be slow progress, but we're making that progress. We have inserted it in our bargaining agenda. We are making it part of our claims. And we need very much to be clear across our movement that we have to drive forward climate bargaining in tandem with campaigning. It cannot just be talking, it has to be doing. And that will take work, you know, growing those grassroots networks within our unions and across our unions, developing our bargaining agenda, actually getting in there to support things like, you know, I noticed that there is the stuff on the agenda as well. There's another amendment, I think it's from the FDA, on time for green reps. This is all necessary stuff that we need to be doing, and it's not alien to us. This is part of the bread and butter of trade union work. We just have to recognise it, and we have to recognise the importance of putting green bargaining work through our movement, like the writing that goes through a stick of Brighton Rock. We're going to be in Brighton. You know, I think that's a point we need to be making. None of the approaches that we're taking will work on their own. You cannot just have bargaining in the workplace on its own, but we need it. We cannot just have policy development and lobbying on its own, but we need it. So while there will be a right and wrong side of history, and I agree in that sense with that characterization, I think we have to be really careful as well through this debate that it is a good debate, is a constructive debate, and we're not alienating people who have those concerns, and we're not alienating those movements, but we are showing that there is a space for us to move forwards together. And I guess I just finish. I think it was the same point that Ian made. There are no jobs on a burning planet. There are no jobs on a dead planet. So we have got work to do, and we better get on with it. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Vicky, for your contribution and insights. And I couldn't agree with you more than grassroots networks are absolutely crucial. And this is why, you know, the Unite Grassroots Climate Justice Caucus has been created without any support of our union, because this structure didn't exist. And we are trying to engage with no resources in, you know, all sorts of industries. We've been at the forefront, for example, in going and support some of the steel workers and talking about the issue of climate jobs, and trying to mobilize the climate movement to support the strikes and the campaign at Port Talbot. I think it'd be great to see, you know, more sort of like more formal structures of unions doing this work as well, in or outside the TUC if it doesn't allow us. But thanks for that. And I'm now very pleased to bring Susan in, Susan Jeffrey, who is from the National Education Union, but also the chair of the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group, which for a very long time now, over 15 years, has been really leading on issues of workers and climate, and has been relentless on and not giving up on this issue, intervening at different conferences, organizing protests, creating strategies like the 1 million climate jobs. So I'm really pleased that Susan is here, maybe to take us to a conclusion, because I don't think Ben and Mel have been able to join us from APU and RMT. So Susan, you're next. Actually, I need to unmute you. You can't unmute yourself. Okay, what's going on? Just bear with me.
Right, I've done it. It's my fault. Okay, sorry about that. All right, shall I kick off? Let me go. So thanks so much for the invitation. Thanks so much to the speakers who have contributed so far. It has been an incredibly useful conversation, and very important that it does happen before TUC, as Vicky mentioned. Thanks also to the organisers meeting. It was a great brainwave to get this called and organised for the reasons that Clara outlined at the start of the meeting. So a few points from me. In terms of my remit, I was asked to speak about both NEU position and, as Clara just said there, to try and summate a little bit of what's been said in advance of TUC conference and what's coming up, and positions that we could take at TUC conference or fight for or discuss. First of all, in terms of NEU policy, I see some of my friends and colleagues and comrades from the NEU on this call here. It's a very sort of helpful story, I would say, a little bit, in terms of the position that we have within the NEU. We're an education union, obviously, but increasingly, as a number of climate activists within the NEU, it became very frustrating that when it came to discussing bigger trade union opportunities like the TUC, the whole issue of climate change tended to be dealt with by the industrial unions, by those unions that had workers directly working in in carbon heavy industries, but really dominated the debate, both on conference floor, but also dominated debate in terms of wider. The message always went out that, for example, give a different example, unions are backing airport expansion, for example. Now, we're in an education union, and climate change, it matters to us what's taught in the classroom, but it also matters to us what kind of energy we use. Is that energy that's going to contribute to worsening the climate crisis, or is it going to contribute to mitigating and limiting the impact of the climate crisis? Why? Because we're an education union, and it matters what world our young people grow up in. It matters what future they have. So the climate crisis is a trade union and working class issue for all workers and all trade unionists. And that's absolutely crucial. And it does matter. And we took a decision amongst a bunch of activists within the NEU that we needed policy within the NEU that had a wider understanding of the climate crisis and the strands of what's causing the climate crisis, and puts the NEU in a clear position of identifying the need for the end of the use of fossil fuels, and for an investment in the transition into the socially useful jobs that can tackle the climate crisis for ourselves as teachers, for the young people that we teach, etc. And that's our position. And our national position is very similar to the PCS motion, very similar to the Unison motion that's going to TUC conference. For all of those reasons, and because we've shared amongst each other, the best aspects of a policy that would make it a working class and trade union issue and unite as many of us as possible in terms of fighting. That's the first thing. And I'm really, Ian's contribution at the very beginning is so important. That's a very visible sign of the impact of the climate crisis. And I noticed in the chat, somebody said that Ian was treated terribly on that Jeremy Kyle programme. I didn't see it, making out like workers are trying to take a day off work because of the heat. What a disgraceful position to take. And I speak as a teacher. In those heat waves, young people can't learn. The classrooms are too hot. They cannot learn. That's the reality of the climate crisis. It's nothing to do with us trying to take a day off work. So it's a trade union class issue. That's why the Unite motion and the PCS motion that are going to TUC conference are absolutely vital. Liz was right early on. Unfortunately, things have moved backwards within the TUC in terms of the policy within the TUC over the last few years. And we need to get policy passed that puts the trade union movement into a progressive position and a realization and an understanding, and unites the movement to fight together on this class and trade union issue. And the Unison and the PCS motions do that. It would really make a difference if those motions are passed, and it will be a terrible tragedy if those motions are lost. Again, in the chat, I noticed someone said, have there ever been TUC motions that have actually, made a difference in terms of what happens? Well, yes, absolutely they have. Liz mentioned one. At TUC conference in 2019, a motion put by UCU actually called on the TUC movement to take action in support of the climate alongside the school climate strikes. And it ushered in a wave of activism in workplaces and debates and discussions, which did move things forward in terms of how people understood the climate crisis in workplaces and the demands that they were making as everyday people. And that's just one example. So yes, it does matter, and it really matters if those motions are lost. I want to just say one word on the GMB amendment that John mentioned to the PCS motion. And again, just quick comment in the chat. Paul Atkin put up, the motions are still to be compensated, so we could end up with motions that have been compensated in a way that we didn't want to. John's absolutely right. The GMB amendment is an antagonistic amendment, and it would undermine, it would make a mockery of the purpose of the PCS and the Unison motions, which may end up being compensated. It would make a mockery of that, because what it says is continue fossil fuel use. We need a diversified energy system, which includes gas. It makes a mockery of the purpose of the motion. The purpose of the motion has to make it very clear that we need to move away rapidly from fossil fuels if we're going to do anything to tackle this climate crisis. Just a small point, it can feel very fatalistic, but every reduction that we make in the use of fossil fuels gives us a fighting chance of staying below some of the horrific rises in temperature that are predicted if we continue in the trajectory that we are going. That GMB amendment needs to be defeated, and the element of another element of the amendment is it breaks the link between the trade union movement and a broader movement standing alongside each other and fighting together. The UCU amendment that Lucy spoke to is a friendly amendment. I hope it will be adopted, calling on a transition away from investment in military to an investment in the socially useful work of climate jobs. I would say a couple of comments on the Unite motion. On the Unite motion, so I think it is a problematic motion. I agree with Clara in terms of it's not simply just saying continue fossil fuel use, but there are some real problem issues with it in terms of the emphasis that it gives to no ban, rather than we need a ban and a plan, and therefore it does pull to a narrative that is very much out there in society that the problem that we have is green policies. Green policies are causing the cost of living crisis. No, they're not. No, they haven't. They are caused by profiteering, by the oil and gas companies raking in profits, and it's a narrative that's put out there. And we need to fight for a ban and a plan. We need to fight for a ban and a plan. Another really problematic element is it talks about an arbitrary ban. It's not an arbitrary ban. And I very much agree. The Green Jobs Alliance TUC report the coverage is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. It's not an arbitrary ban. It's a ban in line with what we need to do globally if we are going to tackle the climate crisis. So it's not arbitrary. 2030, we need to reduce by 25% our fossil fuel use across the world. So it lends itself to a narrative that points in the wrong direction. And finally, to talk about I'll have to look down because I want to get the wording right. We won't let the oil and gas workers be the miners of net zero. Again, it lends itself to a narrative which is miswriting of history and a misuse of the significance of the miners' struggle in the trade union movement. Because I know they were the first things I did as a young activist. I stood on miners' picket lines. It runs deep, the fear of the loss of that struggle, of what happened to the trade union movement of that struggle, and to trigger an idea that that's what's happening because of net zero. It is a miswriting and a misuse of history. Thatcher very clearly said to the miners, the pits will close because they are uneconomic. It had absolutely nothing to do with the environment or climate. And then she went on to import Polish coal, and the next Tory government went on to dash for gas. Absolutely nothing to do with it. And we need to shift the narrative. It shouldn't be we're not going to let the oil and gas workers. We want to say we want a plan so that the oil and gas workers can transition to the socially useful work that will help tackle the climate crisis. That's what we need to see. So I'm going to finish on this. If the Unison and PCS motions are passed, that will give us a great opportunity to organise and mobilise across the trade union movement in the direction that we want to, both to move away from fossil fuels and to transition to the socially useful work that will help us to tackle the climate crisis. It will say we need a national climate service. We need massive investment in those trade union jobs, and we are calling on a Labour government to deliver that urgently and quickly. And it will give us a year of climate campaigning within the trade union movement, which we can take creatively, imaginatively, and impactfully to really make a difference. If the GMB motion passes, calling for more investment in fossil fuels, that will be another step back for us. And that will be a real shame, building on the problems that we've had over the last few years. But whatever the outcome, we have to redouble effort. But there is an awful lot at stake at TUC conferences this year. We obviously don't want to be antagonistic, but we do want to win debates, and we do want to win policy that really will make a difference and that we can really use on the ground. I'll stop there, Clara.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, for summarizing some of the issues and adding your very important points. We now are going to have a bit of time for any questions or comments. So, if people would like to come in, please do use your electronic hands. If you don't want to speak, you are also able to put a question or comment in the chat. I'll do my best to follow that up. I'm just going to assess how much interest. I see a couple of hands already, but what we see on today, hopefully we can have people on the national executive of those unions having more regular discussion amongst yourself to build strategy across the year, not just before TUC, and also approach union like mine to have those conversations, because I think a lot of the problem is the lack of expertise and understanding of what solutions are possible. And the unions we've heard tonight, you've got a very long experience of grappling with those issues. So we need to convince our fellow trade unionists outside the rooms of the TUC. Okay, I've got two hands up. So I'm going to start with George from Safe Landing, and then I'll take Paul Atkin from the Greener Job Alliance. And please, if you can keep your comment to just a couple of minutes. So George.
Thanks, Clara. Yeah, I'm from Safe Landing, but also from the British Airline Pilots Association Union. our union, after pressure from our environmental study group, similar to what other speakers have been talking about, is now scoping a workers' assembly as a way to formulate plans to address the climate crisis. Workers' assembly being similar to citizens' assemblies like those held in Ireland to address the abortion debate, but focused on workers. My question, if this is a space for question, is what place do speakers or others see for deliberative, participatory democratic processes in the form of workers' assemblies? What part do they play in augmenting our existing democratic structures to address this massive crisis?
Thank you very much, George. Obviously, none of that is any of the motion, but maybe for next year. Paul, would you like to contribute?
Yeah, just very briefly, I think this year, whatever happens with the motions, it's going to be a divided Congress. And I would not expect, if the unison PCS motions go through, I wouldn't expect the GMB to be held to collective discipline. You know, they're going to carry on with their line. And I think we should do the same even if we lose. So we've got a whole series of initiatives in those motions. And I think what we should ask ourselves is, are our unions up for building a coalition of the willing, for want of a better phrase, to actually try to implement aspects of those motions, like the year of climate action in our union, through our unions, because we're the ones who are keen to fight for it. And then we can go back and, back to the TUC and try and win a majority next year.
Thank you very much, Paul. And, I'm sure some of us, maybe the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group, may be able to coordinate some debrief post-TUC. Okay, next I can see Sasha and Ruth. So Sasha from FBU, Unison.
Hi everyone, I'm Sasha. I'm the Environment Officer for the London Fire Brigade Unison branch, and I'm also a member of the FBU, as Clara said. I wanted to say three things very briefly. Firstly, I just wanted to commend Clara and the Unite Climate Justice Caucus for making this happen. And I wanted to urge any Unite members on the call who are not involved in the caucus to get involved, because it's an excellent initiative. And during my time in Unite, it really was, I think, the most positive thing I was involved in. Secondly, in terms of what happens to the TC, obviously there'll be bigger forces at play, but I do think what Liz raised about the kind of need for left-wing delegates to be pushy and try and push back against the rotten composite and compromise, and people to think on their feet and be proactive is important. So, hopefully the comrades of the delegates will kind of fight in that spirit. The last thing I just want to say is something about the fire service. I mean, it's obviously a shame Ben hasn't come tonight. I suspect so people know this is the week the stage 2 Grenfell report was released, and it's sort of the FBU is wall-to-wall Grenfell this week, and we just had a national members briefing immediately before this. So I suspect Ben has been pulled into something or other. For all the obvious reasons, operational firefighters in the fire service in particular are, as Clara said, at the front line of the climate crisis. And the FBU has done a lot of very good work around climate, but I think it does lack grassroots organising. And 5 years ago, I was doing a lot of work with people in the FBU around these issues before I was in the fire service. And at that time, there was a little bit more, and it looked like that would kind of take off. So that's certainly something that I think some of us in both the FBU and Unison in the fire service are interested in taking up and trying to organise a cross-union grassroots fire service climate activist network. So, and take inspiration from the Unite work, take inspiration from what Vicky's described about working with CU. So, if you're in the fire service and on this call, or if you know anyone in the fire service, please who's interested in climate struggle, please do put me in touch with them. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. We will be really happy to support those efforts, and I'm sure that all the different groups that are involved in workers' climate struggle will publicize any grassroots network in the fire brigades. Okay, I've got a few more people wanted to come in. So Ruth Bradshaw, you're next, although I think your image is very blurry, but hopefully your microphone works. Ruth?
Yes. already in the chat, I mentioned that it's possible to produce climate-friendly gas by fermenting any organic matter in a biodigester. The Ecotricity do it with cut grass. But in Kenya, many years ago, I saw it done with cow dung. And by the way, the gas didn't smell of cow dung, and they used it in the farmhouse kitchen. It had no smell at all. And it could equally well be done with human sewage, which would solve another problem that we have, and I'm sure Thames Water would be very glad to hear of it. The difficulty with human sewage is to separate it from the rainwater that also goes down the same drains in many areas, and therefore to concentrate the sewage enough to use it.
Thank you.
I think that's all I wanted to say.
So I think we probably haven't got the time tonight to open discussion about individual technologies and solutions. That could be like a very long conversation, especially if I start going on about carbon capture and storage, you won't be able to stop me. So yeah, if we can like maybe, keep comments in relation to, the motions and, the sort of strategies and collaboration, that would be fabulous. Oh, I'm seeing Tahir. Tahir, very good to see you. Former president of the PCS Aviation Group and now coordinator of the Greener Job Alliance. Tahir, please do come in.
Yeah, thank you, Clara. I have difficulty following that last contribution, but listen, I just wanted to pick up very briefly on points that Paul and Suzanne made, because I think it's really important that coming out of the TUC, we need, and no criticism of yourself, Clara, in saying it, but we need more than the debrief. We actually need further developments and events to keep the momentum going, because I think what we've done this year, when you think about it, in 2019, there was a significant climate movement that got stymied by the COVID pandemic and everything that happened. But I think this year, 2024, we've really built some momentum, particularly within the trade union movement. And the thing that has done that is the bringing together of unions around a kind of common motion, essentially. The similarity of motions across Unison and PCS and elsewhere is kind of testament to that work that's been done. And I think we need to continue to build on that. And I think absolutely right what Suzanne said about TUC as a class, climate is a class issue and a trade union issue. Heading that PCS motion up with that line, that's a direct challenge to the kind of regressive approaches that some unions have taken towards climate policies, in which we've discussed in this meeting. So I won't get into it here, but that line deliberately sets out, well, if you believe you're the authentic voice of the working class, how do you deny this particular line? So, and I think what that's done is it's kind of elevated the debate. So this year at TUC, we've got all those motions, and I think the level of debate hasn't just been about individual siloed areas. It is about the whole big picture and how we actually deal with that going forward. And I think having done that, and this is where Paul's point is relevant, whatever happens with the motions, I think those motions will pass, I'm sure they will, but whether they do or not, we need to continue that work coming out the other end of the TUC and continue to build that momentum. So I'll just leave it there, Clara, but thanks very much.
Thanks, Tahir, very important point. Okay, next I've got Andrea and Fiona. So Andrea Oates, would you like to come in?
Hi, I've just got a question really about the voting at the TUC, which I feel like I should know this. But in terms of which motions, go through, does that just come down to sort of the number of members that each union has? I mean, are they already they'll all be kind of mandated to vote the same way or whatever? I mean, somebody pointed out that there's, these motions are from the big unions, but there's lots of smaller unions, and presumably they may not have made up their mind. But does each union delegation all vote together, and are they mandated before they go? And so does it just come down to who's got the most members, sort of thing?
Yeah, I'm sure some of the speakers may come back on it, but yes, each union delegation will have agreed position that depend of their own union position. So they will like go into Congress with, you know, mostly agreed position, unless they give a free vote to their delegates, which I think is very unlikely to happen. And you're right that the bigger a union is, the bigger their delegation is. So they've got a higher sort of weight when it comes to the vote. But there are a lot of small unions that, you know, could be brought on board, and surely some will be there. So bit of still work to do on the conference floor to bring more people in, I guess. Okay, Fiona, would you like to come in? Fiona Dyer.
Hello, can you see
Hi.
me?
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Oh,
We can see you now.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just interested in the speaker who was talking about sort of reaching the wider public, because I work in a climate emergency centre here in Durham, and there's quite a lot of them happening around the country, and we have events and we work with the local council. We've got another citizens forum coming up with the local council, and I also have contacts and have volunteered for Climate Emergency UK, who champions councils, you know, working with unions. I think there is, you know, more work to be done with these climate groups like ourselves. In, you know, we're planning to show the film offshore and get a union rep in to, you know, promote some discussion around that, you know, green transition stuff. So any of you out there who, you know, want to reach out to climate groups, I'd say that's a really good way of getting your message out there. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Fiona. Absolutely very important that trade unions and climate justice groups collaborate, work together. And I think a number of us are trying to make this happen more often. The motion about heat at work, for example, we work really closely with the heat strike climate groups, but many of us in our different sectors, regions, and local area, we're also linking up. Some of us are member of Extinction Rebellion or other climate groups as well. So more for collaborations.
Yeah.
Okay. I can't see any other hands. I can see loads going on in the chat. So, you know, I'm not going to like pick up any questions from now. But I think now, looking at the time, I'm going to like turn back to our speakers to see if, you know, there's any questions they want to respond in particular, or comment on some of the things they've heard or something they forgot to say. Just a refresher for you, the speakers. There was a question from a guy from Safe Landing about, you know, what do you think about deliberative assemblies when it comes to finding solutions to the climate crisis? So don't know if anybody wants to comment on that. There have been a number of people calling for, you know, stronger coalitions of unions outside the time of the TUC throughout the year to work together, regardless of what decisions are being taken at the TUC. And yeah, maybe like comments about working collaboration with the wider public. And Rohan, I did close the questions now, so if you want to put it in the chat, then we may be able to pick it up. Sorry, you missed your time. I'm gonna do it in reverse order, and I'm gonna like call in Suzanne if you'd like to comment on something.
I'm so sorry. Yes, if you are a TUC delegate, can I encourage you to come along to the Fringe meeting on the Sunday night organised by Campaign Against Climate Change? Clara announced it at the start. That's an opportunity to revisit these discussions, but also to revisit them in the context of the composited motions. So encourage people to come and bring delegations with them. Really, I would say a pretty crucial meeting for what happens next. Secondly, I think I'll leave the voting issue maybe to other delegates. except to say that any new policy is very clear that we would support the unison and PCS motions. I know Jenny's on the call here and part of the TUC delegation, and oppose the GMB amendment because it's not our national policy, and I hope very much the same in terms of EIS. And then finally, I think they are great ideas that people have proposed. To hear Paul, others, we need a debrief definitely after the TUC. I think that's an excellent idea, and we'll look to coordinate with others to make that happen. It's a coalition of the willing, the continuation of the crucial work that we do within the trade union movement. Yes, there are win or lose, but let's win. There are some really, really important opportunities that we have to grasp with a lot of energy, quickness and determination.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. And Vicky, I'm going to bring you back next.
Thank you. I agree with what's just been said, and I was just thinking about the way that having a sort of a debrief meeting can actually really just, there was the question that went into the chat about has the TUC ever actually implemented motions? And I mean, the answer is sort of sometimes, I suppose, but what I said under that, I think, is my answer to some others of the questions. It's like it's a declaration of intent to undertake the necessary work. So if we pass these motions, there's a declaration of intent and it's on the TUC books. If we don't pass these motions, there's still a declaration of intent from every union that voted for them and the debate that we've had, you know. So I think the idea of a coalition of willing works, whatever the outcome, but I agree with you, Suzanne, let's win as well. I think, was it Fiona, you were talking about climate emergency centres? I would be so interested to talk to you more, and I think that making those stronger links between unions and community groups and spaces makes a lot of sense. And I'm just going to touch on the question from, I think it was George, who was from Safe Landing. I think making space for deliberative democracy is vital. I'm always worried that I can't quite conceptualize exactly how it's going to work, and I think that you need a sort of deliberation to figure out how you're going to structure your deliberative democratic space. But I think surely that's part and parcel of that, bringing more people together and actually taking the emphasis off of being talked at into conversation that people have together about the things that scare them, about the things that they need to see. And that connects really strongly to a point that was also being made in the chat, and I'm sorry I didn't remember to write down who it was who was making it. It might have been Jenny, but about in Colombia, the transition for miners has to take on board the transition for mining communities, and that hit really strongly with me. I live in a former mining village. I see very, very much what has happened in those communities, and people still talk about that decimation. And I think that having that as part of the conversation from the off and making that part of the just transition and making it really clear that a just transition is for workers and communities and everyone as part of society is what makes a lot of sense. So to go back to the concern that we're going to have a divided Congress, yes, we probably are, but you know what? Airing the arguments and having the debate actually strengthens us for being able to tackle that head on in the campaigning work that we do, in the grassroots network building that we do, in the building that we do, to do to bring back more progressive policy, but not just to bring back the progressive policy, to go back to that point about getting it to actually happen, building our own confidence to do that work, to do the bargaining and campaigning work we have to do. So sorry, I think I missed out a whole bunch of people that asked questions, but those were my thoughts, trying to bring threads together a little bit. And I guess as an education union, we're very conscious of the role of educators within all of this and the training and the retraining and stuff, and that's a very big part of the conversation we didn't even get onto today, but it's vital.
Thank you so much. And just to say that in the chat, I did share a climate justice education program that different organizations have actually run, often in collaboration with climate groups or community groups. We will share that again with all the participants that include training we run on citizens' assembly or workers' assemblies, because the Unite Grassroot Climate Justice Caucus attempted to push forward the proposal of workers' assemblies in our different sectors at our Unite conference last summer. We did lose, I'm afraid, in quite a large majority, but at least we tried. Okay, I'm going to continue with some of the feedback and comments from the speakers. And I think, Liz, you are next in my reverse order.
Okay, thanks, Clara. And I'm going to give a really quick proviso. I'm still in the union office with the window open and a moth the size of a plane has come in, and I have a bit of a phobia. So if you see me flailing in the next minute or two, that is why, and why I was just looking a bit distracted. However, a specific question, I think it was Andrea who asked about how does voting works, and basically your explanation is how it works. Delegations rarely have a free vote. You decide a position that is in line with your union's policy, and you do, you know, a lot of that is a rate sort of starts to be sorted out in advance, but we have delegation meetings. So for instance, in Unison, we will discuss at our delegation meeting what the position will be on the motions 14 and 15, and the amendment to the PCS one. I can't remember if we've already agreed that one. I'll have to check that. I can do that whilst I'm talking, but 14 and 15 at the delegation meeting. I know we're okay on the PCS one. We were opposing the GMB motion. But in advance of that, a number of us on the policy committee in Unison, for instance, are emailing in to say that this is why we think we should be opposing those motions and citing existing Unison policy to try and do that. But I think there will still be a debate at our delegation meeting about it. And I'm not going to sit there and say we will definitely win it either. I hope that we will. And there is a group of us arguing about why we should. But all of this is up for grabs, actually. And that's why it's really important that we're having these discussions and that we're thinking about how we try and take up those arguments. Because, of course, Unison is a big union, and therefore it matters what side our votes go down on in debates like this. I still think the other thing I said stands as well in terms of us talking and reaching out to some of the smaller unions is really important. To get them on board as well, and to have those debates in those unions. Just because they don't organise in the energy sector, for instance, doesn't mean that they shouldn't have a position on the climate emergency. And I think, I mean, the other thing that none of us have talked about actually in the GMB motion as well, that I think people who are at Congress should be thinking about and how we intervene around that, is the way they've linked it to national security as well. You know, that we have to keep the fossil fuel industries because they are key to national security. That's obviously paraphrasing the motion, but I think that's a thread that runs through it, and we have to think about how that can be challenged as well. The other thing as well, I do think it's healthy to have debates and discussion on Congress floor. I don't think the TUC doesn't often have that many debates, and I think this year there could well be a couple taking place, one of them being around the climate emergency. And I think we should be really bold and determined about it, to be honest. And, you know, we should be firm in those debates. It's not a bad thing for us to challenge some of, each other's positions in the unions. Obviously, I want that challenge to be that, our side of how we tackle the climate emergency wins as well. It's not just I don't want us just to have an even-handed debate. I want a debate where our side wins, but I think it's a good thing that we have a robust challenge takes place as well. I don't think that puts people off. I think it helps people see how serious we are, and that again can be really important because, of course, when I'm talking about some of the smaller unions, because they may not have policy on it, they will be some of the ones who might have a free vote, and so we want them to see that there's a whole layer of committed trade union activists across as wide a range as possible. And to make them think, well, actually, I do side with them. I do like what they're saying. I do like their determination. It's the kind of the big union blocks where you'll have a preset voting position that comes out of your delegation meeting, if you like. So I think we should be really bold and determined and hold a line on it as well, and have, friendly but firm debates with people. And I think finally, I suppose, and I definitely agree with the debriefing and what we take forward, because irrespective of what happens at the TUC, Unison, for instance, has a position of having a year of green activism in our union. Now it's strengthened by it going to the TUC, because that makes it something that any union can be part of. But nevertheless, if we don't win the positions we want to, it's really important that we have discussions about how we regroup and push forward and try and come back and win them as well. And I think we should be really, really aware that this debate is taking place. I don't know if somebody, I thought I saw it pop up in the chat, but I'm not sure. So, because it went a bit quick for me at one point. But this debate is taking place at a time when, you know, climate activists are being imprisoned, not even being imprisoned for doing things. They're being imprisoned for having discussions exactly like the ones we're having now, and like we want to have at the TUC Congress next week. It's, you know, we're in a way a bit protected because we're having those discussions in the trade union movement, and it's a formal conference. They are having those discussions on Zoom about the best way to challenge the climate emergency, and ending up with a thought police type sentence in jail. And we have to be part of stopping that happening as well. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Liz, for mentioning the clampdown on climate activists. That's really important, and they're trying to clamp down on trade union rights as well, up to now anyway. So thanks for reminding us of that. Okay, I think next to come back is John.
Thanks so much. Well, first of all, I actually welcome if there is a sharp debate at the TUC. As Liz has said, usually the debates are quite anodyne, and basically everybody agrees about the single sort of some of the issues, and we just have loads of speakers all saying the same thing. Now, obviously, clearly, it's good sometimes to hear people put in different arguments around the same thing, and obviously, emotionally, sometimes the TUC can be quite uplifting. You go away feeling that this was the Labour movement. However, as we know, the TUC does have a culture of trying to compromise actually sharply divided issues, and actually saying that they all can exist in the same envelope of a compromise motion where they can't. And certainly this is a subject where you can't. You're either in favour of moving away from fossil fuels, or you're in favour of retaining fossil fuels. There is no halfway house. If you're in favour of retaining fossil fuels, then you are saying either the climate change emergency is not real, or it has to be lived with. If you don't accept that proposition, if you accept that climate crisis is real, and that carbon and other gases actually contribute that, then you have to move away from fossil fuel. If you retain it, repeat, therefore you are saying it implicitly that actually you are in favour of the climate crisis. I know people don't put it that way, but that's the only way logically you can understand the position if you drill down deep. Now, as I say, we have to be very careful, because we cannot say, though I have heard some people in the environment movement, basically, I hope every oil worker loses their job. I don't. I want them to have a different job. I want them to be protected, because if we do not have transitional plans, transformative plans, they potentially become the raw material for right-wing reactionaries. And I, in one sense, I can understand that. If I'm in an industry that I am just told is damaging the earth, but on the other hand, I'm given no hope, why wouldn't I argue to retain that? Because I say, at least I will have a job, at least I'll be able to feed my family. So whilst I do think we have to have a sharp debate about, if you like, the fundamentals, clearly it has to be in the context of we need transition. Transition is not, or transitional protection is not just a sort of like a catch-all phrase that we just stick a plast over the position and say, it's all right, it'll be transitional protection. The problem we have as a movement, we haven't worked out what precise that means. We don't really have many examples to actually demonstrate. And also, crudely, we don't seem to be politically fighting very hard for that. Now, if we win, that's good. If we lose, well, obviously we should have a follow-up meeting, because I do think one of the key things we can do is, like, you know, to use a phrase, the coalition of the willing should be brought together, not only within the trade union movement, between trade union caucuses, etc., but clearly the wider environmental movement. So whilst I hope we do win, clearly I don't think that's the end of the matter. In fact, actually, in many ways, it might be the start of something very good, but we have to come together. Very, very quickly, about workers' assembly, etc. I'm a bit like Vicky, to be honest. It's almost, the idea sounds good. I suppose maybe I'm a sucker that anything that has worker in front of it, I'm automatically sort of like sympathetic to. But nevertheless, it really would be like to see how does it work in operation. But by definition, and I'll close on this, anything that is deliberative where workers come together surely must be a good thing.
Thank you very much, John. And Ian, the last one to come back, maybe with a less controversial motion, which, you know, hopefully this one will definitely go through. But if you've got any last thoughts to share.
First thing, I mean, you know, a lot of people have commented about the, you know, the work that you do, Clara, and I'd like to add to that. I mean, because like 14 years ago, I mean, you invited me to a thing around green issues, and I asked our general secretary at the time what was our green policies, and he told me we support Celtic. We've gone from obviously having a green policy of supporting Celtic to one where we campaigned against fracking and been involved in many different issues and understanding around the reasons why the climate is a trade union issue and the importance of working with others collaboratively. So working with others collaboratively is key. If unions want to be relevant, you know, going forward, if they want to be relevant, then they have to understand there is a real issue out there. I mean, I know people are disappointed because we haven't had the hot weather this year, and they said, you know, where's the global warming? But the reality is, it's the climate that's impacting on our weather and our ability, you know, not to have the stable conditions that we should have in the UK. So I mean, you know, when I gave my figures before, 23 million people will be impacted on an annual basis because of the risk to health. That includes people in the UK. Well, that includes people in all different trade unions. And trade unions have a duty to protect workers. You know, safety is a key element of what we do. I understand that sometimes the TUC's position and stuff, I mean, obviously, you know, they call me an extremist because I wanted to fight for £10 an hour and abolish 0 hours. So I understand that sometimes the position the TUC takes, you know, isn't necessarily the position that the trade union movement is going to fight on. So I think, you know, regardless of what happens at the TUC, it shouldn't undermine the fight, you know, to actually protect workers going forward, and the need to ensure that we collaboratively and collectively work for the betterment of ourselves, because it's us in the end and our families that pay the ultimate price if we fail to deal with the issue that's in front of us. And I think, you know, using the miners' strike and a 40th anniversary to justify keeping fossil fuels is just absolutely, you know, disgusting. You know, I mean, those people weren't fighting because they were fighting against, you know, being shut down because of climate. They were fighting because it was political, and it was a decision to take on the working class, to destroy the trade union that we all look to represent us and fight for our interests, because they led the way. You know, so to use the NUM and the Great Strike of '84, you know, as a justification for a fight for keeping fossil fuels is disgusting, and it shouldn't be used by any trade union, you know, because that's not what happened. The reality is, you know, it was used for political purposes because she wanted to smash the labour movement, and we should make that very forcefully, I think. You know, on people's assemblies, I mean, obviously, you know, I was part of something called the For Many Network, and we wanted to set up people's parliament. So yeah, I'm very in favour of assemblies. I mean, I took part, you know, in Assemble, which obviously has come from Just Stop Oil, and I took part in those just before the election and during the election. And I think it's really good for bringing people together to talk about the issues that obviously impact them locally and impact them nationally. And the issues which they think are relevant to them. You know, if you're living in, you know, down London, you'll want to talk about sewerage going into the rivers. You'll want to talk about the fact that your drinking water is not clean. So getting those assemblies up and running, and like I say, there's one that's already started called Assemble, you know, and I think they've now called it the Big House or something, where they're going to have these meetings going and traveling around the country so people can contribute. And I think trade unionists should be part and parcel of that. You know, we shouldn't think of ourselves as isolationists and just representing workers in the workplace. We have to recognise there isn't any trade union movement member that doesn't come from a community. And it's our duty to be in that community and to take the arguments into that community about how we work collaboratively and collectively to improve the lives of everybody, because that's what, to me, trade unionism is all about. So thank you very much for the invitation. I do hope the TUC goes really well. I won't be there for the debates, but I'm sure many people will have a fantastic time down in Brighton.
Thank you so much, Ian. And, you know, I want to thank everybody for turning up tonight for this conversation. Hopefully you found it useful. I want to thank our speakers for enlightening us about what may happen at the TUC. There is a link that we will reshare in the follow-up email that I'm hoping to send tomorrow, where you'll be able to actually watch the debates live. If you're not in work or I've got other priorities, and there's also a motion tracker where we'll be able to see, you know, which motion is passed on. That I think there is a key last word that I would like to close this meeting on. We need to be bolder when it comes to this, you know, continuing debate about some unions supporting fossil fuels and not being serious about action around the climate crisis, because this has been going on for far too long. And we respect each other in the trade union movement, but sometimes we need to be a bit bolder, because we cannot say this is jobs versus lives. The reality, and I've just come back from East Africa, many people are already losing their lives because of the climate crisis and extreme weather events. And it's often the poorest people in the poorest countries that are on the front line. Similarly, in the UK, the poorest people, people with disabilities, people living in poor areas that are overpolluted, are also already on the front line of the climate crisis. So it's time for action. And I think through dialogue, we've got a really key role as trade union members and reps and representatives to have those conversations with workers and address their concerns. I remember last year at our Unite conference where, I mean, some of us, we were public enemy number one because we dared opposing the, you know, the proposal to continue fossil fuel extraction. But actually, some of the truck drivers came and spoke to me afterwards. And they were like, oh, no, we want to do more. You know, we know our jobs are on the line. But when back in 2019, we invited some of the youth climate strikers to our branch meeting and we listened to them. We had to change our mind. We had to be convinced that action was necessary and possible. So if truck drivers can be convinced we need action on the climate crisis, then surely all workers and other workers in pollutive industry can be convinced. We just need to have a chance to have this dialogue, and it's not left to just unions officials to, you know, brand some false solutions and not being serious about developing a plan. Where is this bloody plan? We can't just reach the government and say there is no plan. Our union should have a very clear plan and put demand on employers and the government. So let's get going. Let's keep going, comrades. Thank you so much for tonight. And we're not going to give up. Some of us have been at it for over 15 years. So see you soon at some other online or in-person events. And good luck to TUC delegates. Good night.